Hi, this is Dr. Gregory Sadler. I'm a professor of philosophy and the president and founder of an educational consulting company called Reason.io, where we put philosophy into practice. I've studied and taught philosophy for over 20 years, and I find that many people run into difficulties reading classic philosophical texts. Sometimes it's the way things are said or how the text is structured. But the concepts themselves are not always that complicated, and that's where I come in. To help students and lifelong learners, I've been producing longer lecture videos and posting them to YouTube. Many viewers say they find them useful. What you're currently watching is part of a new series of shorter videos, each of them focused on one core concept from an important philosophical text. I hope you find it useful as well. In the ethical writings that we still possess by Epicurus, we see one of the main themes being echoed over and over again, that there are certain things that human beings do tend to fear that it's really not good or prudent for us to fear. And one of the things that he wants to do through philosophical argument is to lead us away from these fears. This is one of the things that philosophy, in his view, can actually provide to us. So when we think about fear, what is fear in this Epicurean perspective? Fear is a mental disturbance. It's a feeling, it's a passion, and it's a passion that causes us some pain or some grief. It disturbs us. It keeps us from being tranquil. We're never quite at home with ourselves when we're fearing. We can't enjoy the things that we actually have when we're inhabited by fear. Sometimes we actually do turn to pleasures to try to mask fear or to distract ourselves from fear. But Epicurus, like I put here, he thinks that fear is actually worse than physical pains. And since mental pains and pleasures have a predominance over physical pains and pleasures for him, the attempts to try to compensate by indulging ourselves in pleasure is not really going to address our fear. So how can we really address our fears? How can we become free of them? Well, we have to, first of all, be conscious of what we're actually afraid of. And in his time, he identified two things in particular, or two sets of things in particular. One of them is a non-thing, according to him, that people tended to focus on. One of them is the gods, or fate, or the workings of the universe and the natural world. And the other is death. Now, how applicable is this to our own time? Well, we're all going to die. The mortality rate for human beings, at least in a physical sense, is 100% in any given population, right? Sooner or later, all physical life ceases. There are people who are, working on this anti-death, sort of idea, but that's, at this point, just sort of science fiction. We are not immortal. As a matter of fact, even the gods are not necessarily immortal from an Epicurean point of view. They're just different kinds of beings. What about the gods or fate? Do we still have concerns about that sort of thing? There are many religious believers. They are not, practicing for the most part the same religion that Epicurus had in mind, the polytheistic common person's view on the gods. As a matter of fact, Epicurus says those people they think they're pious, but they're actually impious because they don't know the true nature of the gods, and they do all these prayers and have all these fears about the gods. There are a lot of people who, whether we change it and make it a monotheistic thing, have something identifiable with what he's talking about. And there are other people who tend to view the universe as a necessarily hostile place inhabited by, some sort of, meanness towards human beings or indifference towards human beings. There are some people who believe in a kind of determinism that we cannot escape from. So Epicurus is addressing these sorts of concerns. Let's look first at his views on the gods. And this is the views not only of Epicurus, but of all of his school that's going to follow him. First of all, against some of the other philosophical schools of antiquity, Epicurus asserted that there actually is human freedom, that maybe some things follow by natural processes and causal orders. As a matter of fact, he had a whole, sort of atomic theory that fits in with this. But there's also the possibility of freedom, and we experience this. So we don't have to be concerned that our destiny has been cast in stone and we can't escape it. We are, to some degree, responsible for ourselves. We can choose which path we go on. We have some control over our own lives. What about the gods? Epicurus did believe in the gods. He says most people have got them wrong. The gods are these perfectly blissful, higher beings, and because they're perfectly blissful, they have nothing to do with human beings or human affairs. They don't take an interest. They don't, play favorites. They don't get involved in our wars. Like I put here, gods don't get angry. They don't become envious. The ancient Greeks, worried quite a bit about making the gods envious. If you get too successful, maybe the gods are going to stick it to you because they don't like it when you're like the gods. Epicurus says, no, look, they're totally blissful beings. They enjoy a higher state of existence than us. And if they actually did get involved with us, there's two things that we could say. One is they no longer enjoy the kind of happiness that they do enjoy, right? Because they'd be bound up with all of our craziness down here. But the other thing is, to be able to get angry, to be upset about things is, in Epicurus's view, a sign of a kind of imperfection, a weakness on the part. And so if we think of the gods as being these maximal beings, they wouldn't have that as part of what they are. So what this means for us is not only are we free, but the gods aren't going to mess around with us and interfere with us. As a matter of fact, we can look at the gods as being sort of examples of what we should aspire to. Natural phenomena, the Greeks and the Romans were very concerned, as many people were, about the connection between natural phenomena and the will of God or the gods. Epicurus says they have nothing to do with each other. Earthquakes happen for natural causes. Hailstorms happen and destroy crops by natural causes. We can actually do natural science, or what he called physics at the time, and we can make sense of this. If you get sick, it's because some disease organism, as we now say, right? There's been a lot of theories in medicine about what causes disease, like miasma and things like that. But, if you get cancer, according to Epicurus, it's not because God has it in for you, or God is trying to punish you, or you did something wrong and God is punishing you. It's natural causes. And we have the freedom to study these things and to make sense of them. And if we do go on and study these things, a lot of Epicurean philosophy was indeed about trying to make sense of meteorological phenomena, we will enjoy life more because we will understand the universe that will become intelligible to us. It will no longer be a source of fear, but rather a source of confidence and even pleasure. What about this, though? Death. We can't avoid death. As a matter of fact, Epicurus says everybody who comes in this world is mortal, and there's no way around that. So, don't live as if you're going to live forever. Live in a prudent way so that you can actually get the most out of this life. He also thinks, and this is going to be talked about a little bit later in a different video, that the old person who's close to death can in fact have the most pleasant life because they have this entire stock of memories that they can look back on. Death puts a limit to that, though. But what is death? According to Epicurus, death is simply the cessation of sensation. We no longer sense anything. We no longer perceive. And indeed of existence. It's not as if I lose my existence, as if existence was a property, according to Epicurus. There's no longer any me to lose anything there. There's no immortal soul. There's no, mind that lasts beyond the body for Epicurus. This is what you get. What you see is what you get, literally, for him, right? So, this actually introduces a kind of dilemma to us, but it's a happy dilemma, according to Epicurus. When can we actually be afraid of death? We can be afraid of death as something coming in the future, which then we would fear when we're alive. And Epicurus says it's really silly for you to be fearing death then, because it ain't here yet, right? If death is in the future, why are you concerned about something that is happening down the line, but's not yet present? So while we're living, we don't need to fear death because we are living. What about when we hit that point? Well, it's no longer a point for us when we hit it, because there's no us. There's nothing beyond that for the being that is experiencing the death. As a matter of fact, you cannot, according to Epicurus, experience your death or suffer death, because when you die, when death comes, that's the end of that person. The person no longer has existence. That is what it means. So if you shouldn't fear death right now because there's nothing to actually fear because it's far off, and you shouldn't fear death because when it happens there won't be a you to actually suffer it, the conclusion of that is that it's a groundless fear for ourselves of death. Now, why might somebody actually be afraid of death? You know, they could be concerned about their legacy. They could be concerned about the people that they're leaving behind. They could be concerned about, the house that they're abandoning. They could also be worried about an afterlife in which the gods are going to punish them for being such jerks, or the gods will punish them because they're jerks, or something along those lines. But Epicurus has already cut off that possibility, and if we have our way of living straight, there's not going to be anything that we need to worry about after we die. Interestingly, Epicurus, one of the things that we do have preserved from him in Diogenes Laertes is his last will and testament. He actually did leave a legacy. He established that philosophical school, the Garden, and he laid down provisions for how it ought to run, including the celebration of his birthday, which was, celebrated the way that many people will celebrate, religious figures' birthdays as well, right? But, was he ultimately concerned about that? Would he allow himself to get upset if he thought or feared that things might not come to pass the way that he ordained them? No, those things are not in his control. And even if they did go that way, there's no Epicurus left anymore to be bothered by it. It's not like there's Hades where you can be looking up and say, oh, look at what they did with the lawn. That's not going to happen in that case. So Epicurus thinks that if we can eliminate these groundless fears, we will in fact have opened up the path to happiness for ourselves.